good to go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I call this meeting to order of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. The meeting is being live streamed. Members, in order for online attendees to hear, please make sure you unmute your microphones when speaking. Please identify yourself when making a second to a motion or the motion itself. For those attending in person, please complete the sign-in sheet located in the hallway before you leave. If you wish to make a public comment, please fill out the public comment card and return it to a staff member. For those participating via Zoom, please keep your microphones muted unless you are called upon to speak. When appropriate on the agenda, we will request comments from those online and those who indicated a desire to speak in the chat box. Staff is monitoring the Zoom and will recognize you when it's time to speak. Aaron, please call the roll.
Great, thank you. Mayor Bennett?
Present.
Frank Beal? President Brawley? Mayor Grasso?
Present.
Mayor Hofert?
Here.
Nina Itamudia?
Present.
Mayor Noak?
Here.
Mayor Reinbold?
Here.
John Roberson? Mayor Rodering?
Here.
Stefan Schaefer?
Present, virtually.
We'll get you in a minute, Steph.
Thank you. Carolyn Schofield? Ann Sheehan? Here. Matt Walsh?
Present.
Leanne Redden?
Present.
And Koros Mohammadian.
Ladies and gentlemen, we received a request from Stephen Schaefer to participate remotely due to illness, which is allowed, and I'll entertain a motion to allow him to do that. Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, vote of no, the motion carries, and we do have a quorum. First item on the agenda, we'd like to certainly welcome Mayor Paul Holford, representing DuPage County. Mayor, welcome to CMAP. It's our new board member appointed by the Northwest Municipal Conference. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Under the Executive Director's Report, Aaron.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you and welcome again, Mayor Hofert, representing Northwest Cook. We look forward to having you join the CMAP board and our family as we talk about regional issues here at this table. So thank you. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything, given that it's your first meeting.
Well, I apologize. I couldn't be here last month. You wouldn't have wanted me here. But I am excited and honored to be a part of this group. So look forward to it.
Great.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. A few things to start here. Our technical assistance call for projects. We continue to collaborate with the Regional Transportation Authority on our technical assistance offerings and our annual call for projects. By working together, we've continued to provide a simple online application format that offers multiple types of planning assistance. So the call will open later this month and communities can start applying as early as Monday, the 26th. Application period will close 4 weeks later on Friday, March 22nd. Again, our technical assistance program is all about providing our communities with the resources that they need to make their communities the best places that they can be. And so, our program helps communities in a number of different ways, whether it's capital planning, strengthening transportation connections, making it easier and safer for residents to navigate our region through some safety action plans that we're working on here. Again, the application program will be spread wide, and we'll ask that you all share that as well as that application is made available. But we will announce the selected applicants a little bit later this summer here for you all on a future board meeting. I also recently returned from the National Association of Regional Councils Conference in DC last night. This annual event brings together regions from across the country to talk about our challenges, our issues, our opportunities. It also gives us a chance to sit down with some of our members on the Hill and talk with them about some of the things that are pressing. But really, one of the things that I was able to do and excited to do was participate in a panel on mileage-based user fees and recognizing that as we think about the diminishing gas tax revenues that we have here in the region, what that future is and how regional agencies can come to the table and be a part of that conversation and really understanding and helping the public understand what some of those changes might be and how we sort of begin to plan for those things. I had the chance also to meet with Congresswoman Underwood and staff at several of our congressional offices. Again, had a good conversation about the work that we were doing, delivered our new infrastructure and investment priority booklet that you have in your bag, your swag bag here. That's one of the things that we had been working on since the infrastructure bill was passed, was bringing together our major implementers and prioritizing the projects that we have across this region for competitive funding. You'll see in this latest iteration of the booklet, there's some notes about projects that have received funding. So I'd love to say that these projects are all fully funded. Sometimes that big initial chunk of funding from these federal grants are critically important to keeping the projects moving. So a lot of the projects haven't changed, but many of the projects have received some funding over the past year or so. So feel free to look at it if you'd like copies to share with your local legislators here in Illinois or federal legislators. We are happy to get you copies as well. Our region, I also should mention, is already seeing success in some of these IIJA dollars. So we want to congratulate Kane County, who received $25 million for safety improvements on Randall Road. And this really came through the mega program project, but again, was one of our key priorities here for the region. I also wanted to provide an update on my recent email to remind you all that we were successful in getting 2 bills filed this session that will support the work of this agency. First is Senate Bill 3388, House Bill 5077, which would appropriate $5 million to CMAP to allow us to carry out a broader scope of our regional planning mission here, really allow us to do the work on climate, housing, and economic development and water in a way that this agency was set up to do in 2005. The second bill, Senate Bill 3389 and House Bill 5078, was the bill that we discussed last month, most recently with you. The primary change in this bill really adjusts that 4/5 voting requirement. But really, as a reminder, we did not change the language for decision-making on regional issues of significance, our funding, federal funding programs, the agency's budget and work plan, and matters of the executive director. So the goal really here is to make sure that our operations continue in the absence of that 4/5 supermajority. So thinking about what is it that we are here for as a region, that we need that supermajority for, and how can we keep the agency's operations moving forward here. Senator Villavallum has sponsored the bill in the Senate, and Representative Delgado in the House, and Representative Ugasti is the chief co-sponsor. The IGA team is actively speaking with legislators across the region about these bills and seeking additional co-sponsors as well. So these bills are priorities for us, again, because they will continue to strengthen the work that we do on behalf of the region. We look forward to your continued partnership on these bills moving forward through the legislative process. We also are continuing to talk with our legislators about the PART project as well. So our staff attended our TA's briefing in Springfield last week. It looked like that was a very successful event, Leanne. And we will be providing a briefing to House members this week, Friday. Just got a couple other things here before I open it up for questions. On the environmental front, the US EPA has finalized significantly stronger air quality standards that target fine particulate pollution, otherwise known as soot, from a variety of sources, including the transportation and industrial sectors. Our modeling team right now is actively looking at how this is going to impact our region. We also anticipate that this rule is going to improve emissions from specific sources such as diesel-fueled trucks, refineries, and power plants, all of which are subject to climate action planning work that you'll hear about later on the agenda this morning here. And then meanwhile, I've got a couple things that are just agency operations related. Our ERP program, we're entering the final stage of our journey to implement a new ERP for our accounting, for our procurement, for our back office needs here. Again, our go live date is July, so we are excited. We will be able to do a much better job, a much more thorough job of providing reports on our projects, on our overall agency budget and tracking over time. So we are very excited about this. It will really help our internal staff, as well as, I think, be accountable and transparent to you all. And then at today's executive committee meeting, we will discuss and ask for feedback on our bylaws. As a reminder, we discussed proposed changes at multiple meetings last year. We went back to the drawing board to work with a smaller subset of board members to talk to you about some proposed amendments. So we'll talk about it at executive committee with the hopes that we bring a proposal to the full board in the following month here. One of the proposed changes is formalizing the process for our consent agenda, which will allow grouping of items into a single vote like we do now for our procurement. We'll place those items under the consent portion of the agenda based on a set of criteria in the bylaws. Again, for those of you who don't work at a municipality, you may not be familiar with a consent agenda. or local government, but you can always pull things off that consent agenda as well. So it's a common approach used by local governments. I want to thank Mayor Grasso, Mayor Rotering again for highlighting that this could be a benefit for us moving forward and making sure that our meetings are efficient here. So with that, I will recognize that Dr. Kuros Mohammadian has joined and also John Robertson. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Leanne?
A question, a request, actually. Since the legislation, the two pieces of legislation that you filed, more specifically the one on the majority, that kind of stuff. And since in the interest, I guess, of transparency and the fact that the lion's share of the money is spent through this organization, our transportation dollars, I'd like to request that actually there be an update for the MPO, as I'm the liaison from the MPO on the board. So I just think helping them stay up to speed on all of that and what you're thinking about, I think would be helpful at the March meeting.
Yep, we'll bring that on the March meeting. Thank you.
I'd also like to ask, since this language went to the legislators when introduced for legislation to change our governance, this board didn't vote on that. It has taken no official stance on it. I just want to make that for the record.
So we have had multiple conversations in public
We've had
forum.
conversation, we have not voted on it though.
Well, one of the challenges that I have is that the executive director here is really making sure that our operations continue to move forward. We've talked about this every month in terms
I
of.
understand
making
if
sure
this is a
we have
major
quorum.
change of this organization and this board has not voted on that legislation or that language to refer it. So to refer that this
I had-
organization, let me finish, please, that this organization has endorsed a piece of legislation is not correct.
I had individual meetings with folks. I sent out the red line version for comments. I received very limited comments from board members. Well, I believe I did my due diligence before filing these pieces of legislation. We've had discussion, Mayor.
None of that is allowed since that language was actually drafted for an actual discussion amongst this board, and this board still has not voted to endorse that language.
Is there a suggestion that we vote on it, Mayor?
Not on this agenda. I think that a thorough discussion of that language, vetting of it, because it goes well beyond what we originally discussed. There's lots of potential implications for further changes in the way that this governance occurs that are well beyond what we initially talked about, which were the day-to-day, more operational issues. For instance, it infers that the 4/5 is no longer the 4/5 of all the potential votes, but rather 4/5 of the seated, which is a major change. In the limited number of things that are specifically outlined in the legislation, really honestly would take about probably 75% of the things that actually happen here and refer them to the bylaws instead of the 4/5 majority. That's a major change. That's not day-to-day operations. In fact, a lot of the granting and funding approvals would not necessarily be covered under that 4/5 any longer. The
They would
part
be
study
because
vote.
it's the
would not
annual-
be.
It's our annual budget.
The budget would be, but the actual breaking down and assignment of those funds would no longer fall under the 4/5 majority. So there's a lot of things that are well beyond day-to-day that no longer would be under a 4/5 majority. So I think it's worth everybody having a much deeper look into the implications of that language as specifically presented, which we did not have a detailed discussion about.
I've reached out to board members on numerous occasions and we've had this discussion at this board, and this is the first time that I'm hearing of this. So
Well,
I,
again, we should have an opportunity to have an actual discussion about language during a board meeting instead of all these little side conversations where different items may or may not actually emerge that may be of concern that other members might not have been able to notice in their own review, but others might. And so a healthy dialogue amongst the board members on such a fundamental change in the governance of the board should occur at the board level, not in secret in small groups.
Mayor, I don't think that was the inference of the executive director. I think she talked individually to members, not necessarily groups. I think the core, my understanding, nothing was changed by those individual conversations versus what was presented to the full board. The question again about whether to vote on it, that's certainly up to the board itself. But again, the conversations that I recall, certainly with this full board, broke down basically, the ability of of the agency to function regarding issues such as contracts, which we receive on a monthly basis.
And again,
As-
th-
as-
those
let me
things,
finish, let me
okay.
finish. That those were the obstacles when we didn't meet, for example, 2 months during the summer or a month in the fall. Technically for this group not to be able to go ahead with those contracts. The contracts are a reflection, as you know, on the executive committee. The contracts are a reflection of the budget spent throughout the year. The board does approve the general budget. So the changes are a monthly operational thing, as I thought was discussed. Nothing of major consequence of this organization regarding policy, regarding the initial budget that should be passed by the organization would change. There would still be 4/5. We're talking about some functional things here. And again, let me, Mayor,
I just want to thank Mayor Noak for raising this point. I think it does make sense for the board to have a public conversation and vote on this issue.
And Chair, it also is procedurally correct. It is our authority to do that. It also protects the executive director and the chair from the very thing that's just happening right now, that there is a formal process. I don't think we're talking about substance at this point. We're talking about procedure. And I do agree with Mayor Noak and Mayor Rotary. Thank you.
Nina Itamudia here. As a board member, I will say my perspective is a little bit different. I have been very aware of the conversations that I have been having. We've been having them for a very, very long time. And I remember even last time I spoke up and said like, hey, we're having troubles getting quorum. We really need to take care of this problem. So I don't know, from my perspective, I feel like this is something that has been belabored and been talked about constantly and openly. I understand that there are board members who have different perspectives, but I wanted to offer mine. And I also, I mean, if there is a desire for our board to have a vote and for that to be discussed now, I think that's appropriate. But I also would like for everybody to be respectful, not talk over people, and not just disregard the work that they have done. Because I personally have talked to Aaron about this. I've talked to staff about this. We've had multiple conversations about this over, I want to say, has it been like a year that we've been talking about this? So I just want to acknowledge that this is a conversation that we have had multiple times, and it has held up business for this organization multiple times. And we, as in somebody who supports these changes, are trying to solve that problem so that CMAP can continue to do business as usual. And so unless so yes, let's have a conversation if we feel like we need to vote on it. I think that is an appropriate conversation, but also let's be realistic that this has carried on entirely too long and has held up business for this organization that we all sit on the board for and are supposed to be supporting, executing work, getting things done, helping community members. And we have not been able to do that, accomplish that for over a year because these conversations have been held up, continued, and almost, like no action has been taken. So that's my vantage point, and I wanted to offer that for the public record.
Yeah, again, one other comment that was sent out to all the members, that the actual bylaws itself with the legal changes that were involved and suggestions that were made were all spelled out, highlighted in that document. So the discussion and or the language that was being proposed has not changed, and that document was given to everybody. But again, if the board feels, that properly we should vote for it, somebody make a motion.
Let me point out a few things though.
That's right.
While this dialogue
Meeting.
While this dialogue has occurred, and I do not disagree, and I do think that, and I agree that there's a sentiment to do the day-to-day work. The reality is this language, the specific language that was used for the legislation was not sent to the board members till after our last meeting. We have not had a public opportunity to have a dialogue about the specifics of the language. Conceptual ideas are one thing. Actual language and how it actually impacts the organization, especially something that changes the governance of this organization, should be publicly vetted in detail, not in conceptual conversations, not in little sidebars. This should be an actual public discussion to talk about the specifics of the language as it is applied to this organization in detail. If I can continue. Again, I've been in agreement that the day-to-day operations, in fact, we've had a lot of conversations where the thought was to change the bylaws. This legislative idea was only more recently brought up. And if it was brought up amongst smaller groups, that's also a good question of whether or not that was happening in smaller groups and not being talked about to the whole group. The bylaw changes, however, has been talked about for over about a year or a little longer, but that was also talked about in very day-to-day operations. This legislation and this language goes beyond that. That's my point. And that ultimately this should have been taken and had into an open dialogue and voted upon because it's a fundamental change to the organization. And as, you know, I agree that day-to-day operation of the bylaws, but also concerns were brought up even on those with the bylaws, that even within this executive committee, that should still be held to a 4/5 majority. That's been ignored in this. And so, again, maybe it's because, you know, didn't want to be a full debate about it, but we need to have a debate about language that we only received maybe 2 weeks ago. So
It was more than 2 weeks ago.
2.5 weeks ago.
It was immediately following our last
Well,
board
let's
meeting,
pull the
but
date.
regardless, you know, I wish that, you know, you had given me a call because we could have amended the agenda to have a vote on
With all
this
due
agenda.
respect, I mean, you're the executive director. It is your part of your job to make sure that everyone, throwing a piece of language that one would assume that we would have a dialogue about in an open thing, and just assuming because no one responds that is suddenly okay. Well, that's not a public debate. That's not this, you know, having a true open forum about it and going through the specifics so that maybe one of the other members might see something that I don't see, or maybe I see something that they don't see, and bringing that to their attention instead of having this in small hidden groups, which unfortunately
John,
seems to
I'll
be.
take offense to that. Nobody's accusing
I'm-
anybody of, I shouldn't be accusing anybody of small groups. I think the executive director clearly indicated that she's reached out to individual members. Unless you have aware of some small group of these board members getting together and discussing this, I'd like to know that, but that is not a true statement.
We did
Mayor,
have a small
over.
group to talk about the bylaws. We had 3 members on it.
We've had multiple groups because I
Yeah.
believe it's my due diligence, not to do it in night of day, but because I really need to talk to all of you. And one of the ideas that I had was really recognizing the strengths of having multiple people in a conversation about these things, right? Because exactly as you stated, is that I don't have all of the answers. And when I look at things, I'm coming from one perspective. So I need multiple areas of guidance from the board members. We have had this conversation. One of my challenges is we had 2 meetings that were missed this past year. We are responsible for updating the entire transportation improvement program for the region. The data hub needed to be updated. I didn't have an approved contract. I had to call the consultant multiple times and say, hey, I'm sorry your system is outdated. I'm sorry we need this update. I haven't been able to have a board meeting to be able to conduct business of this agency and move that forward. If we do not have that information in the board, those federal dollars do not flow to any of the municipalities and the counties across the region.
And I don't disagree with that. And fundamentally, that what we had originally discussed, which is a very narrow empowerment to be able to accomplish those things, is not, I'm not in disagreement of. What I'm in disagreement of is that we should have a dialogue about how much more profoundly this potentially changes the structure and governance of this organization and goes well beyond that.
So
Thank you. Chair. Let me put this on. I think we're talking about procedure. Nina, I agreed that this has been discussed. It obviously now needs to be resolved for all the reasons Erin brings forward. So as a member of this board, I ask that it be put on the next agenda
Absolutely.
and that we have the time and the language again, please circulated so that we have the considered time to have a proper vote. And I think we're talking procedure because I think substantively, I certainly agree with a lot of the language, if not all of it, and it needs to be done. But we're just talking procedure, and I think Mayor Oak is correct procedurally. But I appreciate the time and what you need to do and try to keep the cats herded. But let's all herd at the next meeting and discuss this and vote on it.
No problem. That will be done and put on the agenda. One other point about changes. We can't do anything because we are regulated under state law, under the Planning Act. That's why any changes that have to take place have to be done legislatively. We can't do it on our own. So that's why this conversation is going on, probably even longer than a year because of the restrictions that this agency has been under from day one regarding the supermajority of anything that takes place. And again, I'm not going to rehash it, but Mayor, no problem. It will definitely be put on the next agenda for consideration of a vote.
go for it.
I know I'm a newbie, and I'm just learning about this now, but just on the surface, if quorums are a problem, that seems like the core issue. Why don't we address getting more people to the meetings, you know, so that you can I mean, we all sit on other
I-
boards.
I hear
and,
you.
You know,
Yep, and
we,
Appreciate it.
I mean, you're going to see me at every meeting, so I'm going to be here to vote. And we all sit on other boards and, you know, the executive director, I'm just talking in generalities.
Mhm.
The executive director always reaches out and says, hey, are you all going to be there? Because we have important things that have to get approved. And that way they take account of who's going to be there. Doesn't matter which way they're going to vote. It's just a matter of who's going to be there. So maybe addressing the core issue and I'm not schooled on this yet, but rather than creating a workaround because we don't get quorums, maybe we just need to address the quorum issue. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, I'm just saying. So it sounds like it should come to discussion next month and come to a vote.
And Mayor, unfortunately, there's been a problem over the years with the board generally. Maybe in the early years, we didn't have the problem with a quorum, but we've gone through periods where that's a problem. And I've certainly addressed that with the board, the members. You're appointed to this board, you know, please attend the meetings. Better said than done. And unfortunately, whether somebody gets sick, bad weather day or whatever, we've had those situations. But it's also the period of time where the board does not meet in July and August. The board also does not meet in November. So there are periods throughout the year where there's no meetings. So those are the carryover periods too that we're talking about here on operational things that would give the authority to be approved internally.
No, I understand, and I need to come up to speed, so I'm just talking in generalities. But if something needs to be approved and we don't meet in July and August, maybe that month we do need, I don't know how that works, but maybe we do need to meet in July because something needs to be approved, or I don't know, special meetings can be called, but maybe a special meeting gets called and we come and we vote. And maybe it's just 15 minutes where we get together, and I know it's a long slog to come down and do that, but to your point, if you're going to sit on the board, then sit on the board. And
That's the bottom line. Right?
I don't hold myself to some righteous level, but I'm just saying that if you don't want to sit on the board, if you don't want to come to the meetings, then don't sit on the board, I guess. It kind of comes to that. So I'll just leave it at that because I'm the newbie, but.
I wanted to offer one more comment about this because actually I brought up my concerns about this board not meeting quorum to Aaron the last time I spoke to Aaron, because it's been something on my mind. It does hold up business. And as a board member, and I'm sure you're all professionals and you sit on boards, you are on, you have a board. The work of the board is done in between the meetings. If you are not actively participating, reading, understanding, proactively even reaching out to Aaron, yes, it is the executive director's job to reach out to us, but it is also our jobs as Aaron's supervisors or bosses to say, oh, I see something. Let me reach out to Aaron and ask her a question. Let me proactively read what's going on and say, hey, I think this should be brought up at a meeting. I think that is what professional people at our level do as board members. This is what we should be doing. When I have concerns about what's going on the board, I proactively reach out to Aaron, or Aaron reaches out to me if she needs information or wants my perspective on something. This is a two-way street, not a one-way street. And it's our responsibility as board members to take our jobs very seriously. I take the privilege of sitting on this board very seriously. And so when I brought up to Aaron that I had concerns that we weren't meeting quorum, I even offered ideas. I said, should we all be signing kind of like responsibility, memos of just acknowledging that this is a requirement and we have to be here so that business can go as usual. And she, and we had that conversation and she said, we're thinking of things and trying to problem solve this. But, I just want to offer that to my colleagues on this board that, again, the work is done in between the meetings and we have to be as proactive as we see fit. If we see concerns, not show up at a board meeting with these concerns to hold up, again, more business when we're trying to get work done. And so I just wanted to, again, offer that perspective because I know I take this position very seriously. I'm sure you all do too, but we have to start showing up differently because this has been a problem for more than a year.
We have attendance requirements. Some organizations have a policy where if you miss so many meetings, your seat is declared.
Thank you. is declared vacant?
Mayor, not in the past. All the members of this board are appointed by the counties. And at times, I can recall over the years that we may have put a call into the county chair who appointed that person indicating, lack of attendance. And then that person would attend for a while, but there's nothing in the bylaws regarding that. It's strictly the appointment of the process of the appointments by the county chairs for the organization. So again, we don't have a scorecard now.
And if I might, I mean, Mayor Bennett and Carolyn, a few of us have been here a little longer. Some of you are probably more recent. And I gotta be honest, I don't think that anybody's consistently missed ever that many to even trigger that anyway. I mean,
We had
maybe a few.
we had a run of one or two.
Well, there's maybe, but for the vast majority, that wouldn't be the case. So again, the dispute isn't that there needs to be some changes. It's the fact that something this fundamental should automatically be something that the board has a public discussion, vets the merits of all the language, and votes on before we move forward on. This is a fundamental change in the structure of this organization. It shouldn't have required that it needs to be on the agenda. It should automatically be on the agenda. So, but
We will make
I'm
sure that
happy
it's
to-
on the agenda for next month. My ask of all of you is that if we are going to approve this and move forward, that I will need full attendance from the board.
Again, for those who may, it's just, I'm belaboring this thing, but at times it's, whether it's the weather or whether it's somebody sick and coincides with somebody else being sick, et cetera. We have had, since COVID, some problems with gathering a quorum, and maybe it was getting back into the coming down here every month that it didn't click in somebody's mind. But anyway, we're past that. We'll get on with the agenda and a vote next week, or on the agenda for a vote next week regarding.
Next month,
Next
not
month.
next week.
I've been meeting with mayors so much every other day that it's
I was gonna say, I mean, we'll
Next week.
probably talk to each other before the end of the week, but
that it happens that often. We're all very busy, I gather. Okay, moving on. Are you done? I'm sorry.
I am done.
Thanks. Moving on to procurements and contracts. There are 5 before you. And Stephanie, you give a presentation on it?
Good morning. I am Stephanie Pfeiffer, and for those of you joining remotely, there's no need to adjust your screens. I am the Deputy of Planning, but I am currently stepping in as the interim Deputy of Finance and Administration. So thus, I'm here to answer any questions regarding the procurements and contracts this morning. We do have 4 procurements and contracts for your consideration today. One is the authorization to contract for task order contracts for CIP and ADA related technical assistance work. The next one is an authorization to contract for organizational change management for training and implementation services related to the agency's new ERP system that Aaron mentioned. The next one is authorization to contract for staff training and matrix management practices. And the final one is an authorization to amend the contract for partner training in ADA, transition planning, and self-evaluations. Details of all these procurements are in your packets, but I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Oh, it's not. Sorry, and I just noticed this earlier today, but on 5.02, do you know why the discrepancy was so significant in those the contract bids? I think that was 02, right? It was like $1 million between.
So I would only be speculating. However, I can say that I do think when it comes to change management, I do think having an understanding of the scope of change and culture shift that needs to happen in an agency does play into the proposals that we received. And so I would just speculate that the proposals that were of a higher value were speculating that we had a much larger shift in culture than what we had put forth in the scope of work.
And so you don't have any concerns that this one, I mean, I think 2 were like $1 million more than the one that you selected. So you don't have any concerns for that? I mean, sometimes that kind of raises a red flag as to, well, do they really know what they're doing? But not accusing this one at all, but just saying, historically speaking, do you have any concerns with, I mean, it's great if we can save $1 million, but it does kind of raise a little bit of a red flag.
Certainly, Carolyn. I think that is a very good point and something that we did labor over as we looked at the different contracts. We did have multiple conversations with the consultant to ensure that they fully understood the scope of work that we had put forward. And this was actually in line with the budget number that we had originally contemplated. And so that also gives us a comfort level that when we did research on what would it take to do the work that we entailed, this was the budget number that we had originally put forward. So for that reason also, we felt very comfortable that we could accomplish that work with that amount of.
Okay, and I know I've raised this, maybe just a little notation in our packet would be, at least for me, it would be very helpful. So, and I know it's been a couple, just when they're a little off like that, any kind of little one sentences to your reasoning would be greatly appreciated. Thank
That's
you.
a great feedback. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the contracts? Let's you-
And I'm assuming all three of these were working off the same RFP.
Correct. Yes.
Is it one motion?
Chair will entertain a motion
I'll-
for
Motion
all of
approved.
them?
for all of them, yes.
I'll put motion for all.
Second.
Moved and seconded by DePage. Any further questions? If not, all in favor,
Northwest.
Northwest, I'm sorry. Signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no, motion carries. Sorry, Mayor.
That's okay.
And we do have one less, it's a resolution. Is that item 5?
I think we were hoping to take all of those together, but given that we were only talking about the financial ones,
Yeah,
5.05, we do also need approval.
Go ahead.
A resolution of the appointment of our HR director to be the IMRF authorized agent. IMRF does require that the board approves the authorized agent, so we are seeking your approval.
Is
on
there a motion regarding?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, vote of no, and the motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the proposed comprehensive budget and work plan. Aaron, you're going to take that, or?
Yeah, I am. And actually, we have a video here this morning to show you, but Stephanie Pfeiffer and I are going to go over some of the budget and work plan for this year. First, we'll just show the video that shares some details of our work plan in a more engaging way than just listening to me here. So you go ahead and hit play.
Hi, I'm Erin Alaman, Executive Director at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP. CMAP works on behalf of 7 counties, 284 municipalities, and nearly 8.6 million residents in northeastern Illinois. Our work is guided by ON to 2050, the region's 30-year comprehensive plan. Its guiding principles of inclusive growth, resilience, and prioritized investment, and its suite of recommendations. A 5-year strategic plan further guides the agency's work with 3 focus areas: transportation, regional economy, and climate. Each year, CMAP develops an annual budget and work plan. New for fiscal year 2025 are descriptions of multi-year programs that include a portfolio of projects and outcomes. In this short video, we'll share some highlights from our proposed work plan that begins on July 1st, 2024.
To advance our transportation goals, we continue to invest in the Safe Travel for All Roadmap, or STAR, to improve road safety in the region, including 6 county-level safety action plans funded through the federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. As part of its metropolitan planning organization responsibilities, CMAP manages the Transportation Improvement Program. We evaluate applications through the call for projects and program nearly 2,000 federally funded projects in a 5-year plan.
The region relies on CMAP as an authoritative data source for forecasting and modeling. Our travel demand forecasting produces valuable data used for air quality analysis, long-range plan scenario evaluations, capital project evaluations, and the measurable impact of policy changes. The next budget year brings the opportunity to update our region's transportation plan. This federally required, cooperative, performance-driven process builds on the strong vision and goals established in ON to 2050. With our partners and stakeholders, we'll identify additional performance targets and measurable objectives as we work towards 2050 goals that include community, prosperity, environment, governance, mobility, and inclusive growth.
CMAP is involved in 2 major efforts to advance the region's climate goals: the development of a regional climate action plan and a partnership with 2 national laboratories. We aim to better understand greenhouse gas mitigation strategies. We continue to partner with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus on these efforts. Our upcoming work will support research and modeling to better understand the action needed to foster a clean energy transition for the region's transportation system and to advance equity goals for air quality, accessibility, and affordability.
On the economic front, CMAP continues to coordinate with the regional and local partners to strengthen our region's economic competitiveness by leveraging our many assets, including infrastructure, transportation, freight, and more. And we're making progress towards our goal of a robust and inclusive regional economy through the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership, a collaboration among the 7 counties and the City of Chicago.
So much of CMAP's work intersects. Many of our programs advance multiple priorities. For example, we can build resilience and protect infrastructure from climate change through research and analysis, regional and local planning, partner engagement, capacity building, and helping to secure, prioritize, and guide capital investments in climate projects for the region. At this intersection, we forecast and analyze land use at the regional and local levels. Communities rely on CMAP's community data snapshots and local and regional socioeconomic forecasts to plan for future growth. With our partners, we can create stronger links between the transportation system and the location of people, jobs, goods, and services by coordinating housing and land use strategies. And we continue to provide technical assistance to build capacity for our communities. This budget year, we will conduct municipal surveys to better understand priorities and challenges to help inform our future work. We continue to grow accessible communities across the region through training and education, technical assistance, and outreach and engagement. Also at this intersection, we will advance the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, or PART, recommendations and focus on long-term issues facing the region's transportation system with an emphasis on land use, the regional economy, and climate.
CMAP's Environmental Justice Program is also at the intersection of economy and climate. We are excited to continue our innovative equity work that strengthens relationship with environmental justice communities by directly engaging marginalized communities in long-range planning activities through our Community Alliance for Regional Equity cohorts. CMAP makes progress on our transportation, climate, and economic fronts thanks to a team that delivers services and provides strategic and operational support to the agency. This includes data, communications and engagement, program management, informational technology, finance, and human resources.
Whether meeting annual goals like the ones we've just highlighted, or strategically planning for the next 3 decades, CMAP is here to serve the region. We work in partnership with the CMAP Board, the MPO Policy Committee, and our many partners to influence policies that make Northeastern Illinois a stronger, more resilient place to live. As we embark on the regional transportation planning process, we will engage with you to develop a new, shared vision for our future. The last few years have transformed the way we live, work, travel, plan, and think. As regional planners and policy influencers, transportation decision makers, and implementers, we, as a region, together, will set a new vision and course of direction for the future.
All right, thank you for that. That is a highlight of the programs and projects. I also have Stephanie here, who I'm going to turn it over to, who's going to talk a little bit about the numbers in the budget.
Good morning again. So the video gave you a good overview of the work. Now I'm going to go through and highlight a few of the numbers for all of you. With the first slide, really looking at revenue, the proposed FY25 budget reflects a $44.44 million in revenue. To serve the region, CMAP leverages a combination of federal, state funds, philanthropic grants, local contributions, and other government funding revenues. Those are represented in this graph. Our UWP funds are $27.5 million, or 60% of this revenue, and that supports the majority of our work, which is in the transportation space. This, however, does require matching funds, UWP matching funds, and that is a 20% match. And for those, we rely on non-federal revenue sources to meet that match and support projects outside of our transportation space. To do that, a large portion of that is local contributions, which contributes 1.75 million annually. These payments are local government partners, are from local government partners, including the collar counties, Cook County, the Tollway, RTA, and the City of Chicago, and other all of our municipalities. Recently, we asked partners to increase their contributions to support the additional funding that came from IIJA. Last year, our large government partners doubled their payment, and this year we requested that our municipalities increase their contribution by 20%. So just to note though, although these increased contributions, this still only makes up about 4% of our revenues. Moving on to expenses. Our expenses have increased compared to last year, and this is primarily due to the additional grants that were secured. And the increases come in personnel costs, which is partially due to inflationary measures, but also includes additional staff that were required in order to meet the funding needs for those additional funding sources. Also, travel costs increased. This is because we are increasing our in-person engagement with some of the efforts that you heard about in the video, but also because we are tied to the state of Illinois travel reimbursement schedule that was recently increased. And so we needed to accommodate those increased costs in our budget as well. Also, training and education. This is the funding that goes to grow our team members' knowledge to address the region's dramatically changing and evolving issues and new technologies. And then consulting costs. This is the most significant portion of our FY25 budget. It's 32%. This is an anticipated increase of $7 million, which is double the prior year's budget. And this is attributable to the success of CMAP in securing those additional outside funding from various funders. That includes the Safe Streets for All program, Clean Energy to Communities, and the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. So that did cause a large increase in our consultant dollars. But in order to leverage that, understanding that it does take internal staff to be able to leverage those, we have used a PMO service approach where we are contracting with vendors to be able to have a broad scale consultant-led projects. They're responsible for overseeing these other projects, these other contracts. Finally, the non-federal revenue sources I mentioned with the last slide. Unlike other forms of government, CMAP, as an Illinois MPO, does not have the ability to generate revenue in traditional senses. However, as part of their TMA certification review, the Federal Highway Administration stated that CMAP's heavy reliance on the state to provide matching funds presents an area of significant organizational risk, and recommended CMAP identifies sustainable revenue sources to match federal funds. So given those two dynamics, we did wish to follow that guidance, and we continue to explore stable and consistent local and regional funding sources to ensure the important planning work in this region continues unimpeded, such as those local contributions and applying for a variety of grants that I mentioned with regards to the revenue. But in order to provide that stability and further diversity of our funding sources with other grants, which usually require a local match, CMAP has identified in this budget an approximately $700,000 dedicated to growing its fund balance reserve. Another portion of our expenditures is related to the contractual UWP subawards. This year, I think there's the next slide with that one. There we go. So this year, a large portion of our expenditures do go to our partners. So this year we deployed a new unified work program methodology for awarding those core and competitive funds to our partner agencies. The result is a proposed award amount of $6 million distributed amongst the region's transportation partners listed here. The majority of that funding is going for core MPO activities. This includes participation in the Transportation Improvement Program and maintaining the ETIP database, collecting data that is shared with CMAP, the Planning Liaison Program administered by the Council of Mayors, and other operational activities. But in addition to the core program, there was also a competitive program this year. And so there were 3 competitive awards included in this year's budget. One is for CTA for the I-290 Corridor Improvement Project. The next is for DuPage County for their bike ped plan. And the last is for Metro for targeting station ridership counts. So overall, with the revenue mix, as part of our long-term goal to diversify our funding, the agency has steadily increased non-UWP revenue to this year being 23%. And this again is largely due to those competitive grants that the agency has been able to secure. Diversifying our funding sources enables CMAPs to fulfill its obligations according to the Regional Planning Act, which directs the agency to carry out work in our climate and economy focus areas beyond our transportation areas. As you can see, the overall mix of UWP and non-UWP funding is also impacted by the issuance of the two major infrastructure bills identified with the two lines on the slide that were enacted in the last decade, including the FAST Act in 2016 and IIJA in 2021. So then in closing, some highlights for the budget. As was identified in the video, we do have 3.2, there's a period there. 3.2 million that we did get an SS4A money to do this, the 6 county level safety action plans that will unlock future implementation money for the region. The climate, $1 million in climate action planning, which will again unlock up to $5 billion for climate mitigation across the region. The Americans with Disabilities Act plans, along with new technical assistance offerings, continuing to build the capacity of our local governments. The Regional Transportation Plan, which is targeted for completion in 2026. Data governance, which includes foundational projects to improve CMAP's role as a data hub for the region, including the data governance framework. And then lastly, a PMO to convene and coordinate partners and corridor stakeholders, so partners and corridor stakeholders to advance multimodal improvements in the I-290 Blue Line corridor. So those are some highlights and some of the numbers. With that, I'll turn it back to Erin for next steps, and I'm happy to answer any questions after the presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Stephanie. So following approval from the board, what happens next is we submit our proposed regional work plan and budget to IDOT. Again, this is a little bit of an iterative process. We get our budget to them, our draft budget to them this month after approval. And then in May or June, we firm that up with them so that we have a full funding agreement for July 1. Alongside this process, the UWP, the Unified Work Program budget, also will be recommended by the MPO Policy Committee. Again, we'll get those contracts approved. Right now, the UWP work program was approved by the UWP committee on February 7th, goes to the MPO Policy Committee on March 14th, and the Transportation Committee in the middle there. I think that is it in terms of the next steps here. I think the following slide just is a thank you and questions. So again, continue to thank you for your support of the diversity of the work that we've been doing. I think we have a healthy and robust budget and activities that will benefit all parts of the region. So for that, questions.
Thank you. Stephanie, I'll start with you. I've got 2 questions.
She's coming back.
Unless she was right behind me or something. So Stephanie, just please explain to me, I'm also in a learning mode. When it comes to grants, good thing, but explain to me why then our staff expense goes up. And then, how does that work? Does the grant not cover the required additional staff? And is additional staff an FTE? And is it something then that we have going forward, or does the staff end when the grant ends?
All of the above. So first off, the budget that is being presented to the board today is a comprehensive budget. So the staffing that is in there, it does reflect those additional funding sources. So if we do get money from a grant to cover part of the staff, that is part of that increase. So that is included in the comprehensive budget. You will notice though, as I said, for the first time, we have the majority of our budget is actually in contracts, consulting contracts. That is also reflective of the additional funding sources. It's not necessarily sustainable, right, to bring on staff and then roll back that staff when that funding is usually a 2 to 3 year funding source. And so the approach that we have taken is that our staff is staying pretty steady as far as numbers, but that we are increasing the number of contracts that we are utilizing the additional funding to accomplish the goals. So in answer to your question, sometimes it is an FTE, sometimes it's a partial an FTE. More often than not is a partial FTE that is funded by those funding sources that are non-UWP. And some of them will be rolled back at the end of that grant, but we do try to be able to limit that because we do think building and investing in our staff is something that's a valuable thing to do. And so keeping them on, if we can in that capacity with other grant funding is a priority.
Thank you for that. And then Aaron, I just have one more learning question. If I read the chart correctly, IDOT approves our budget. And, you know, it's like, why is that? And I understand we're a state agency, but I
Yep.
get nervous when I have to deal with IDOT as a mayor. So,
No, great question here. So our role is a couple different ways. The metropolitan planning organizations across the country exist to receive and facilitate federal funds into the region and out to the communities and counties. We get the majority of our funding is grant funded. So that those federal dollars that come to us and then that go out to do the federal planning and the management of the transportation improvement is federal dollars, but it's granted to us through IDOT. And that is why they are responsible for approving our budget. So they are not responsible for approving grants that we received from the Chicago Community Trust, grants that we received from Illinois EPA, but that is why they approve. So the majority of our funding is IDOT funding or federal funding. Yep.
I just have a very small question. How often do we update the population estimates for the local contribution? And the funny thing is, I saw ours and our number's a little low and census was off on
You
one.
ready to get more money?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, it's $200 probably. I mean, we'll give you the $200. It's just a small little thing. I'm like, you know, I don't mind paying the extra $200. So, just a question.
Yeah, so good question.
2020 census?
2020 census. I know there was a lot of discussion about the validity of the 2020 census and the numbers that were there. When this program was put in place, I think the biggest principle was that we were thinking about the agency, because I was not here at the time, was thinking about counties, implementing agencies and local municipalities. And so they used our community cohort model to determine what the rates were for local municipalities, which is a combination of like equalized assessed value, population, their tax revenues, and then put people into one of 4 cohorts. So it's not sort of a 1-for-1 based on population. It's really based on ability to pay.
It's good for everybody to know that. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, again, if you want to change it and update it, it's fine.
We can
If
certainly
nobody
look
else
at
had a
that. If
question, I'll
anybody's-
make a
if
motion.
The board
to approve.
members directing me to do that. I will.
Just a quick comment regarding, for those who are new on the board, when this agency was formed and drawn, the Regional Planning Act was drawn up by the General Assembly, we had very little say-so in how that act ended up being written. So we get back to the issue of the 3/5 majority, unlike many other service boards in the region. But the other thing was funding. And that's why one of the pieces of legislation going forward, and I've been chairman since its incorporation, is the fight with the General Assembly. You pass an act, you authorize the creation of CMAP, combination of Northeast Illinois Planning Commission and the MPO, Council of Mayors, Local Transportation, but never gave us a dime in funding. So that fight has been going on from day one. We receive approximately, 3,000 or 3 million?
We get $3.5 million.
3.5
from
million
IDOT.
from the state through IDOT to support the agency, but that really goes towards the whole transportation side of it. So that's why we are introduced again, finally, legislation and to go directly for funding from the General Assembly as an annual appropriation for CMAP. And we also threw in the other MPOs throughout the region who also have planning parts of it to be funded. It's crazy. For Frank, you've been on the board from day one. I mean, we put this organization together with strings. Fortunately, the Civic Organization of Chicago, Civic Commercial Club of Chicago, helped us put the organization together, lay out the strategy for its administration, our operation, and it was all donated. So we were very fortunate in the beginning to be able to do that. But from day one, we have never had a dime of additional dollars coming from the state of Illinois, who created this organization to fund us. And that's why we're requesting possibly as much as $5 million annually to support the other side of this agency, which is in the areas of planning. We've been fortunate over the years to receive grants. Our staff does an incredible job on reaching out and procuring many grants that have benefited this region tremendously. So we're fortunate to have that. And again, just in general, that the the agency, our agency over periods of time have been asked by the General Assembly, because we do function as a state's quasi-state agency authorized by the state to perform different tasks, including the part, which was asked by us, by the state to do it. And we've had other asks in the past, but again, never a dime for us to complete those kind of things or annually to support us. So that's also part of the legislation that we'll talk about next week or vote on next month. I'm sorry.
You really want to meet next week? I'm happy to see if we can get people.
That's the mayor's side of me coming out. Meeting every damn day. It's, but anyway, that's for the new members to give you an overview of how remarkable this agency has functioned over the years without that type of funding and the recognition we've received for the great job that we do as an agency, working with, 7 counties and 284 municipalities. So, Mayor, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just want to start with thank you to Aaron, thank you to Stephanie and your team. What a tour de force to pull this together and then give it to us in such an easy to digest format. I thought it was really well presented and appreciate all the hard work that went into that. Thank you, Mayor Noak, for raising the same question. I was like, 2014, where are we 10 years later? So thank you for asking that question. Yes, Highland Park also has a few more people.
We're taking notes of those who want to pay more. So I'm
Selling brownies on the corner. I support the reserves and appreciate that you've moved into that direction. And I would be remiss in my representation of Lake County if I don't continue to raise the issue that I have a concern about how awards are made based on whether it's straight population versus taking into account acuity of transit deserts, of which we have many, I know, in the collar counties. So just want to raise that point to make sure that we are accounting not only for the people, but for the people who can't go anywhere because of where they are located. Thanks.
Mayor, we'll get back to you. You had a motion.
Yeah, I'll motion to approve the.
Second,
budget.
Rotary.
Moved and seconded. Any further questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, vote no. The motion carries. Aaron, thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, that's the community outreach and engage. Mike Brown.
Me.
Good morning.
I am Michael Brown, currently serving as interim deputy of planning. I'm happy to have this discussion with you around our community engagement efforts as we build our vision of building an inclusive and thriving region. Hope this is a discussion. As you heard, we are preparing for the call for projects to go out later this month. And as we launch our new projects, we definitely want to take your feedback and thoughts and ideas from today and incorporate them as we move forward with our next round of projects. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the specifics with the planning division, I would like to lift up our recently approved, nationally recognized public participation plan. This plan sets the principles for proactive engagement and participation throughout the agency. Whether the project is from our technical assistance program in planning or major regional policy initiative with the RPI teams such as PART, the agency as a whole is committed to these principles that establishes working relationships with a variety of stakeholders. Next slide, please. And we believe that commitment is evidenced through our intentionality. With the budget conversations you just had, you've heard the shift on the video, the shift to organize all our activities into multi-year program areas. Here on the slide, I've copied pages from our program charters that requires each manager to consider 2 things: what stakeholders are essential to establishing and accomplishing the goals, and how are we informing and educating all stakeholders about the work we are doing. It is through these intentional questions that we are proactively considering and integrating these activities into the project from day 0, thus creating the expectation that these are not ancillary activities, but essential to the operation, the product, and the process, but most importantly, the advancement of the building of an inclusive and thriving region. Next slide. The public participation plan outlines these major groupings of stakeholders. We did provide you in your swag bag a copy of the public participation plan, and on page 12, it gives you the details of who we consider these groupings to be. And this is the process where we ask ourselves, who is impacted? Who are the implementers, the collaborators? Who are the funders and decision makers? And most importantly, who is most impacted without a voice, without power, without influence in our processes. So program and project managers work collaboratively with our comms and engagement staff to develop engagement plans to answer those questions and outline goals, the target audiences, sometimes an equity analysis timeline, decision points and milestones. Next slide. Using an adaptation of Sharon Arnstein's Ladder of Citizen Participation, the International Association for Public Participation developed this spectrum describing the general modes of engagement. Next slide. I like to think of this still in the vein of Ernestine's ladder because you really cannot achieve higher levels of engagement absent of previous ones. The best practices of collaboration begin with informing. Another note of this is that the levels of effort for us as staff increases as you move from the bottom to the top. Think about preparation time, the number of materials, the actual time to execute the engagement, the staff to audience ratio. All of these allocation of resources increases as we move from inform up to collaboration. And typically, the sizes of audiences decreases as we move from inform to collaboration. I would venture to say that we engage all stakeholders with information. Just look at our website. We have a plethora of information out there for people to digest, but a smaller group of stakeholders are invited to collaborate with us on the work that we do. Next slide. Then we consider the grouping of stakeholders on page 12 of the plan with this levels of engagement. How do we neutralize the power dynamics that typically create marginalized communities, marginalized groups? So before jumping into details of what we're doing in the planning division to operationalize these approaches, I would like for us to just take a moment here and hear from you about how you are approaching participation in your various roles in organization. What consideration, if any, do you give to engagement levels in your target group? But keeping in mind that we are operating in an environment where there is significant public distrust, and we are a profession that has the legacy of discriminatory practices and harm. And so we really pursue and think about these questions early on to make sure that we are bridging those gaps and hopefully healing versus continuing more harm. So please, if anyone have thoughts about how you're approaching engagement.
Sure. Talking to folks throughout the county and hearing what their challenges are and getting a better understanding of what resources, A, they're aware of, B, they need, and bringing it up. I know Aaron can almost say verbatim what I say regularly, which is that there are so many folks who are never heard, can't get to work, can't get to school, can't get to the doctor, can't move out of where they are, can't get better housing, can't live in safety because of the transit deserts that exist, at least in my county. I'm pretty sure most of these counties. So that's where I am literally speaking with people, hearing their transit stories, at train stations, asking, how did you get here? You know, were you on the bus? And then where are you going? And where are you going to go to work? Hearing from folks as far north as Waukegan who have a bus ride, then a train ride to get to a minimum wage job, spending enormous portions of their day just trying to get to work. So that's where I'm hearing from people in particular to highlight this acuity that I regularly am raising. But then also talking to folks within my own community, we have trains on the hour. That's a lot of wasted time if you aren't on that 1 hour, or not even having trains that are direct. Looking at our schedule, is it cheaper to take the train? Yes, but what's the cost of time? And if it's going to be an hour and 15 minutes for what should be, or was in the past, a 40-minute train ride, how's that impacting the economy? And then also hearing from people in terms of their ability to get to and from work, specifically recognizing the impact of transit on our GDP and what portion of our state's GDP is from this region, And how are people able to continue to contribute to that GDP based on the limitations that are currently evolving in transit, again, out to Lake County?
Thank you for that. And what I heard was really getting that first person narrative of their experiences. So that informs your representation of them at forums like this.
Yeah.
Share a couple of quick thoughts, and I know the CMAP staff are pretty intimately involved in some of the stuff we've done in the transit space, but I'll just note too, I think key points that really changed a couple of years ago, how we were engaging and interacting. And one is really meeting people where they're at, literally, physically, not just sort of hosting a meeting downtown or wherever, or even at a municipality, but actually going to festivals and community activities and actually engaging people one-on-one and in small groups in those conversations. So informal, but a good foundation of information. And then from there, once we've identified sort of people of interest who also have an interest, in engagement further with us, we've done things like actually paying people to participate in our meetings and activities. When we did our whole strategic plan, we had a whole funding pot of money to actually fund people to travel and their time to actually participate in the meetings. And then more importantly, even beyond that, or before that, I should say, is spending time doing kind of, in our space, transportation and transit sort of 101 stuff, because many of us sort of sitting around this room kind of eat, sleep, and drink some of these things, and we sort of have a vernacular, shorthand, acronyms, I hate them. And it's intimidating to people who aren't doing this on a day-to-day basis. And so we spend a lot of time doing some kind of 101 class, almost classwork with people, information, and then small group meetings before we brought them into sort of bigger working groups or other activities that we continue to pay and support them for. So I'll just leave with those two.
Other comments?
I love this topic. So I'm going to speak from one, working in government for over a decade, both at the city of Los Angeles and at the city of Chicago, where I really enjoyed my tenure, now being the CEO of a nonprofit that works really heavily with CBOs and has really good relationships with CBOs. But then also just as a Black queer woman who grew up on the east side of Detroit, where public transit wasn't really accessible, but I took the bus every single day to the school in the suburbs. So I just wanted to say, like, that's the perspective I'm kind of giving you information from. One of the tenets, and I thank you so much, because I feel like you said a lot, paying people for their time, like being transparent. You can't make friends when you need them, is a saying that we have back home. I think government agencies, I understand that we have limitations, obviously with our time and our ability to like really engage. And just like Leanne said about meeting people where they are, you also have to like be in community with people when you don't have a project in front of them. And you have to build those relationships and cultivate those relationships in between when you need something, so that people know that you're not just there to suck information from them. And that's where mistrust comes from. And I know from being from the city of Detroit, that's where a lot of my family and friends find mistrust, is when they only come to the neighborhood when they want something and they have some money on the line and they're like, oh, we need a little bit of community engagement, so let's throw them something, right? So I think establishing those relationships, and I think with the care programs, that CMAP is really doing a great job, and that's a model that I think other people can emulate across the country. Also, honesty and transparency, but I think we need to come up with some definitions of what honesty and transparency actually looks like. And what I mean by honesty is that even when I was in government, I was definitely, because I'm a Black woman who grew up the way I did, I had a different perspective than maybe the people who had came before me, but I also knew the limitations of government, right? I knew that, when I was over the American Rescue Plan funds, what we could spend money on and what we could not. And so I was very honest with community groups and saying like, hey, this is what we can do, but I can't do this. And let me tell you why. Let me walk you through the steps, but I am open-minded to finding alternatives to what you're trying to get to. And I think what we lack on the government side sometimes is the ability to be honest, because we're afraid of pushback, and a little bit of vulnerability from professionals like ourselves of saying like, I see the direction you'd like to go in. Let me tell you the tools that I have to get us there, and where I'm not equipped and where we may need to rely on philanthropy to help fill in gaps. And that kind of cultivation of honesty and trust in community is how we're able to say, especially even when I was at the city of Chicago, like, okay, there's limitations here, but we can go to CCT and say like, hey, we need you to pull in. And we also have community groups who are on our side because they understand what our limitations are, and they're lock in step with us. And so I think being honest, and then also when it comes to transparency, it's not just like putting out a report at the end of something, but walking people through the methodology of how you got there, keeping them lock in step as you're developing your plan. Even if they disagree with you, just being honest about how we got here and this is how we do it. It's not to say that everybody will be happy, but at least there's some consensus. And then again, if people understand how we're thinking and how we're making decisions on the government side, then, they may not like it, but they'll at least respect your ability to be honest and transparent about how you came to a conclusion or how you decided to spend that $1 million this way versus that way. I would say that those are things with engagement. And then honestly, it starts with our leadership and our staff. If our staff and specifically our leadership, if it does not reflect the people that we're talking to and there's not diversity of thought in our leadership, whenever I look at working with companies that I want to make sure have like values, I go to look at who is in their leadership. And if you're saying you have DEI values or JEDI values, but your leadership is homogenous, then I'm going to call, what my conclusion is that your values stop on paper and not are actually implemented in the system of operationalizing change in your own organization. And so I think a lot of those DEI values start within an organization because that helps to elevate the impact of the work outside of your organization. So those are some of the things that I would say are the tenets that I work with. And I know CNT has those same values, and I think it's a very successful model.
I don't know who was first. John?
Just 45 seconds to kind of dovetail onto what Nina said. What I would say is that certainly from Mayor Johnson's perspective is that part of the evolution of this in terms of participation is also about co-governance. And for those elected officials, we understand that co-governance is hard because it is about including people, not just informing them of what we are doing, but actually involving them in the decision-making. To believe in the principle that people in their communities know what is best for them and that they actually have a hand other than their elected representation in being able to say, this is what we want. And so that co-governance requires a lot of leaning in. It required, because as government entities, our propensity, as Nina said, is to come to a meeting, present a plan, tell you what we are going to do, get feedback from you, go back inside, dismiss everything that was said, and then come back and tell you what we're going to do anyway. And so the co-governance model, because it is hard, because it does require actually involving people in the decision-making in a legitimate, genuine, and sincere way, it means that part of our job as government is to help educate so that people can come to the conclusions of what is best for their communities within a framework that allows all of us to be able to be a part of that decision-making.
Very good. Since we're all sharing, I think, looking at this outreach, because you got a lot of different groups and different things, and it's on a lot of different levels. And I'm going to mention a couple of things that, at those various different levels. Some things I've mentioned before as well. First of all, I'm going to play off of the chairman's comments about how often we seem to talk per week these days. One of the positive things I think, in knowing a lot of these members personally and talking to them multiple times a week, is that they're involved in a lot of different agencies, well beyond just this agency. And so there's a constant level of input at various levels, whether it be regionally, topics of transportation, it'd be on the statewide level or in the national level, frankly. So there's a good, healthy conversation that's constantly going on. And I tell you, it's probably one of the most valuable things we have is that inner dialogue that we have on a regular basis, or that interpersonal dialogue. One thing that is not really a criticism, and don't take it that at all. It's a concern as we look at talking about continuation of community outreach and what we do here at this organization. And it's a challenge, really, is how to get greater output or input from outside of the city and Cook County. And it has been an ongoing thing. It's a challenge. It's not easy. It's not a criticism at all, because it's hard for even those of us that are outside of the region to get input and participation sometimes. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that we can pay everyone, but I think we're all here to help in that challenge. It's just something that it's going to continue to evolve. I mean, obviously, coming out of COVID, a lot of people didn't want to participate at all. on certain things. So, you know, it's just one of those things that as this agency, looking at ways to make sure we're well rounding out the full region in the way in our perspectives. And again, I think staff's done a great job trying to do that. It's not an easy task. And I don't know that it's fully attainable. But we can continue to try. And, you know, a smaller scale, much smaller scale, something I'd like to share. And it's a best practice. I may have mentioned this before, because I really actually, our youth programs for planning, I think, are some of the greatest things that we do. And you have youth on here as one of the things we want to talk about as well. And one of the things I did early on when I took over as mayor in my community is assign a youth member to our planning and zoning. And I've since expanded that to many of our, to other commissions within our community. We just recently renewed a new form of our Sustainability and Conservation Committee, and we have youth representation, and it's a rotating membership. So there's always a new input, always a new perspective on a younger generation. I think you can even start that small. You know, I mean, you know, it's a healthy way to see new perspectives as they're coming up, and they have just a different way of looking sometimes. And every generation is a little different. We've been doing it over a decade now, so I've seen the evolution of that. I'm so very proud of all of them. They're just amazing people, and they've become amazing adults, and it's great to see the things they've done. And you talk about these small things. One thing I do, and it's kind of I don't know if anybody else does this. I really roll up my sleeves. I take actually residents on a bus, and we go like on a 2-hour tour. I'm joking that I might be Gilligan here if I go on a 3-hour tour. And I actually roll up my sleeves and just actually get in the bus and let somebody else drive. And we actually look and fundamentally feel everything. I find it incredibly interactive in the fact that we go to sites. I tell people all the time that there was a time when I would have more traditional coffees, but the problem would be I'd run into somebody 2 weeks later, and they'd ask me, they go, "Hey, I drove by this, and I wanted to ask and have input about that." And I found that, you know, if you put them on a bus, they remember those things. It triggers that dialogue and interaction. You can stop, you can get out, you can feel it, and you can envision it with their questions, their perspectives, and it allows everybody to interact better. There's all kinds of things we can be doing. Not that all those are solutions, but little pieces that from the smallest thing to the biggest, more regional thing, we can cumulatively do. I love the idea of continuation of youth involvement at every level of government. I think it's one of those great things that we can do and build upon a new generation. So thanks for asking.
Frank, good.
A comment and a question. The comment is that I thought it's an impressive piece of work, and I congratulate you and your colleagues on putting this out. And the question is, did you consider labor unions when you were talking about stakeholders? In Illinois, labor unions are huge stakeholders and often get ignored to our detriment.
Yes, I would believe we would, I guess, while these groups are not finite, we would consider them between the community organizations and business community kind of understanding, but definitely consider those.
It's not specific on the list that you have here. I know it's just a representative list, so.
Any other comments?
I would definitely agree with that. And to broaden that a little bit, remember that labor is not cohesive as well, that there are regional perspectives even within labor. You know, again, you know, it's a challenge, but you know, there are opportunities out there.
Thank you very much.
Very minor, actually, just comment. Thank you, first of all, for all the actual great work on this report. But just on the last page on Appendix F, acronyms, ET, actually E is missing from there, just if you want to fix that.
So noted. Thank you.
Speaking of acronyms.
So noted. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in lieu of the time, we are going to skip the next presentation. We'll have it at the next meeting. So we can conclude this meeting as we try to within certainly an hour and a half. And is there any other business before the board? Mayor?
And I'll be quick. Thank you. Since we're looking at bylaws, I would think it would be better practice if we had a roll call when we get to budget items, approving the budget or something.
Yeah,
like
the
that.
chair recommends that.
I mean, that's just the mayor and me, and I'd rather make sure I look all my trustees in the eye and make them vote when it comes to the budget.
Yeah,
And you might consider that, that's,
I think I've done over a period of time. If there's something of substance, I usually call a roll on that. Usually it's a consent that I think that usually appears on some of the items that, we don't do roll call, but if you want the chair to roll it every time, I can do that, but. Any other, public comment do we have?
The team is checking.
Oh.
Garland's on?
Garland,
Great.
go ahead, Garland. Garland, are you there?
Or if there's anyone in the audience.
Yes, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, good morning, Chairman. I wanted to welcome the new board member representing DuPage and I want you to, from representing Northwest, and
I
I
made a
want,
mistake.
yeah, and I want y'all to show them how me and my wife, when we was living there, how we helped out for people with disabilities. So one day he should go to a disability organization firsthand in person so he could see how the disability community takes public transit so that there won't be a desert out there, so they can see, so he can experience it firsthand. And then maybe one day he's going to probably ask why there is no public access for public transit for the ADA in his community. So I think he needs to see it firsthand. And as a former CMAP on the committees for the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting and the Housing Committee, and also former ADA Advisory Committee meeting, when he sees and show him the video too of the go on to 2050, how we are effective for people with disabilities, so that he could see firsthand, he'll say, wow, this is unbelievable. I didn't know about this. And I think he'll see it firsthand. So I think y'all should definitely show it to the new board member and let them see it firsthand, how we've done it. And also want to make sure about what you said about the budget, make sure it's a clear one, but especially we got some for those who cannot speak clear English, because that's always a barrier. So make sure how the budget is going to be a fair one and accurate one, because there are some just really they really don't understand it and how they can affect it. So we need something like that to make sure in different languages, not just English. So make sure that you have that in there down the road so that people in the disability community will say, now they speak in our language and we're understanding what they're talking about. So that is my suggestion for that. And I'll be glad to answer the comments from you, Chairman, or board members concerning about it.
None being Garland, but we thank you for your comments and as always, your consistency in town or out of town as to how this agency operates and your work with ADA. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right. And also just want you to know, countdown to my birthday is coming up 9 more days for me, and I'll be 58 years old. Age is just a number, and just want you to know, no matter what, I'm still living, and on the 29th of last month, me and my wife celebrated 20 years, and we got married in Chicago at City Hall. So just want y'all to know about that. So we made it through 20 years for us.
Congratulations, happy birthday, and wish you well.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments from the audience at all? Yes.
If you could come to the microphone and identify yourself, thank you.
But I've been in before Saturday.
Good morning, Drew Duff from McHenry County Council of Mayors. More of a procedural thing. I'm not sure if the minutes got approved at this morning's meeting. Just want to make sure we didn't overlook that accidentally. We did? Okay, that's my mistake then. Thank you.
I thought we did.
We did. Did we approve the minutes? Yeah, Blanca says yes.
Freaking me out now, geez.
But hold on one
I got
second.
distracted beginning of the meeting, so
Okay.
it's
Yes. No, because we let Stefan in. We did not.
Cheryl, entertain a motion to approve the
meetings. Minutes.
Moved by,
Second.
seconded by,
President Reinbold.
any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no. Motion carries. And mayors or members, anytime if you feel that, you would like to have a voice vote, just raise your hand and the chair will recognize that. It's just for efficiency. We will again meet in March on the 13th. The executive committee, we've got
Over in DuPage room.
in the DePage room. We got a busy schedule there. So with that in mind, thank you all, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, signify in the usual manner.
Aye.
Motion carried, meeting adjourned. Thank you again.
Okay.